All right, well, welcome everyone to the inaugural Climate City Insider live stream, a quarterly presentation of the Collider Network based here in Asheville. You might wonder why we call ourselves Climate City. Well, we claim that moniker due to the largest repository of climate data on the planet, stored in the Veach Bailey Federal Building, right down the street from the Collider office in the heart of downtown. Just so you know how much data that is, in 2020, it was 14 petabytes of data. And I'm not sure I can even begin to explain how much that is, but it's an awful lot of data. And it's only gone up since then. My name is Mary Spivey. I'm a science editor for the National Environmental Modeling and Analysis, and I'm going to try that again. The National Environmental Modeling and Analysis Center and Applied Research Center at UNC Asheville, and a former community manager of the Collider. I put the URL to the Collider website in a chat so you can visit the website, learn more about what we do, and how you can become involved. Today's presentation, Climate Industry Today, Jobs, Careers, and Networks, is presented by Jim Fox, Senior Resilience Associate for FernLeaf. And I'll also put that URL in chat in just a minute. Jim Fox is a Senior Resilience Associate with NEMAC+FernLeaf and is a board member of the Collider. Jim has over 40 years of experience in helping people understand and make changing world. Jim is the past director of NEMAC, where he led the group from 2005 to 2020. The private company FernLeaf was spun from NEMAC in 2014 with the goal of commercializing climate resilience products and services. The NEMAC+FernLeaf team is known nationally for its significant role in the development and ongoing management of the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit in collaboration with NOAA's Climate Program Office. Since the development of the public-private partnership, Jim has helped develop and deliver community resilience assessments that include climate for West Palm Beach and Tallahassee in Florida, Charleston in South Carolina, Asheville and the surrounding region in North Carolina, and also North Carolina's Triangle region and the state of North Carolina Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan. We're so pleased to welcome him today. Now, before we begin, just a few housekeeping bits. We are airing today on Zoom and YouTube live stream. Only those on Zoom are able to submit questions, comments, and network via the chat feature. We will address questions today at the end of Jim's presentation. So as questions arise or come to your mind during his talk, please post them in chat. And with that, please welcome Jim Fox.
Thank you very much, Mary. And thanks everybody to being here. Just as a best practice, obviously, for Zoom, if you haven't muted yourself, please go ahead and do so. Let's see if I can get the rest of this to work. Okay. Just as a reminder for those of you that need a reminder about the Collider, you know, we're a nonprofit here in Asheville, North Carolina, and we're a network of members, member businesses, organizations, individuals. And, you know, why are we talking about jobs today? You know, our vision is really to be a national example of a working climate services network. And, you know, one of the main parts of this vision is creating jobs and providing some education and training. So hopefully today you'll get a little bit of a taste of that. And also wanted to really be listing our values sitting through here. We're a proud organizational member of ASAP, the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, who has also really helped with this talk. A big shout out to them. But again, our values are based on the values and principles of our professional organization as well too. And one of those key principles is collaboration. And we're just really looking for ways to build collaboration nationwide to meet this large challenge that is facing us as a nation and society of a changing climate. Just as a little bit of an overview today about what we're going to be talking about, I'm going to start a little bit with an idea of what are some of the drivers, you know, that are helping and hurting us on some of the job fronts. You know, where are some of the jobs? You know, how do we classify them? Who are the workers and who will they be? And, since again, we're based here in Asheville, we really want to make this very personal to, our local network, the Asheville region, but also talk about how it applies nationally as well too. And really then, end with a little bit of discussion of, okay, now you've got this information, what do you do with it? If you're, looking to get into this field or looking to expand your role, what are some of those questions you ought to be asking? So let's start with this idea of what's driving job growth. So when we start thinking about it, let's think of this as a force field analysis for our climate change economy. And really starting with, well, what are some of those winds that are blowing in our favor? Well, probably most of you recognize the graph at the top. That is the US billion-dollar disasters. And it's, current to early this year, but obviously, we're going to see exactly how 2021 ends up. Proud to say, this comes out of, locally here, Asheville, and the Climate Center downtown that Mary gave the big shout out to for NOAA as well, too. Well, this information and the fact that the climate is changing is becoming something that more and more people are accepting as a fact, which is very good because that's a large battle that we've been fighting for many years. The second thing is it's coming out, there's a clear financial benefit to investing in climate adaptation and mitigation. Federal agencies like FEMA and NIST have gone ahead and shown, the benefit cost ratio is at least 4 to 1. In other words, you get a 4-time return on investments that you're making in this space. And some estimates are even higher than that. And if you can find a better benefit cost ratio on a personal investment portfolio, please send me the link for where I can invest my money in that as well too. Also, we're seeing that governments at all scales are really starting to enact policies and laws to really be supporting climate adaptation and mitigation. We're seeing communities looking at increasing the base floor elevation for areas that flood, for looking at policies controlling land use in some critical areas. We're also seeing that the marketplace is creating some financial incentives, both kind of a carrot and stick. I've got a Moody's logo down here, but you can see that from a financial point of view, they're recognizing that cities that invest in climate adaptation can get a much better bond rating than those that don't, because it's a lower risk to be giving them bonds than a community that is not investing in resilience. Of course, the last point I have here has a question mark. Have the political winds shifted? And we saw during the Obama administration some pretty strong winds blowing in our favor. Obviously, through the Trump administration, there's kind of the opposite. And the question is now, have those winds actually shifted? And that brings us to this next slide of, well, what are the winds that are blowing against us? Well, hopefully you'll get a little bit of a chuckle from, the frog in the pot of hot water and understand that analogy. But basically, we as humans are really not comfortable with change. And, when we start talking about having to change our lifestyle, our society, our infrastructure, the whole way we think about this, that is introducing change. And it's hard to get us to start embracing that. Second thing is, a lot of a changing climate is based on our use of hydrocarbons. As a society, we've been using hydrocarbons well over 100 years. And so it's really all that all of us know in our lifetimes. And we're really addicted to cheap energy. And, as hydrocarbons came on the scene, it was really giving 100 times plus up over the old idea of either manpower or horsepower, those sort of things. But that cheap energy is running out. The graph on the left is showing how the global oil inventories have really kind of reached their peak and are starting to drop off. And I think you're reading in the news too, all of these different shocks that are happening as people are trying to understand, how do we move off of this hydrocarbon reality and into an alternative energy? And it's not going to be an easy path as we start making that transition. We're also just seeing that there's no national voice or semblance of priority. Climate change is not something that everybody agrees upon, and therefore there's not this national lack of urgency. I think also we all know what's happening in Washington right now as the Congress is debating a lot of the bills that are coming through there. And a lot of that is the conversation that's happening along stranded assets. You know, we think about different parts of our nation and what local culture and values are tied to, and things like West Virginia coal and fracking. And, you know, people naturally, you know, fight hard to protect what they know. And it ties into this first point of really people not being comfortable with change. And so I'm going to ask the same question at the end of this slide that I asked at the end of the other ones. Have the political winds really shifted? And if so, you know, for how long? Is this going to be, you know, winds continuing to blow in one direction or another? And we probably are, you know, just going to have to be comfortable with a lot of that variability and uncertainty as we continue moving in this road and making the decisions to be doing the right thing. I really like this chart from a recent book, In Harm's Way by Cleveland and Plastrick. And you can see that, you know, the chart looks at that same billion-dollar disaster curve shown in the light gray on the you know, behind the scenes sitting through here. But across the bottom is, you know, the number of the years moving ahead. And then the vertical axis is kind of the pace of change. Well, you can see that the billion-dollar disasters is just one indication that the climate risk is increasing very rapidly, as shown by the red line. The green line, unfortunately, shows, you know, how much capacity that we're building nationwide, and it's definitely lagging behind the faster accelerating red. And so we're at this inflection point where we really need to think about how do we get that green line to catch up to the red line. And the bullet points I have presented on the right are really some of these key things we talk about, right? To preserve this idea of a livable future, you know, we really need to get serious about climate mitigation. You know, the second part is increasing risk really highlights the need for a lot more attention on the adaptation side, and for this attention to be toward an equitable type of solution as well too for everybody that's involved. And you can then see that from a jobs point of view then, that as we start looking at how that green line can catch up to the red line, that's a real business opportunity. But the question we have to ask ourselves is ultimately, you know, who's paying for these new climate services? You know, is it going to be staying with the federal government by and large? Or is the private sector really going to be starting to invest as well too? This next section really talks about where the jobs are going to be. I've already mentioned our professional society, the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, and really, again, want to give a big shout out to ASAP for some of the information and some of the next slides that you're going to be seeing. EESI, I have put out a report, and you can see the link down on the bottom sitting through here, but it really quotes some of the things that are coming out of ASAP. And first of all, really kind of want to start talking about, well, where's a lot of this information coming from? You know, there's no real specific occupational classification for these types of jobs. And those of you that are members of the Collider, you remember 2 years ago, we really tried to do our own internal analysis of who was working in this sector, well, what are those jobs, how do we assign classification? And, you know, we found, you know, that there were about 500 jobs here, full-time jobs here in Asheville directly tied to climate services. But it was really a difficult thing to start saying, well, how do you assign those into classifications and what does that mean to people? And one of the reasons is because our climate service industry does not provide a single good and service. That, you know, this work is spread across lots of different industries, lots of different sectors, and this is a growing area. And a lot of people are kind of defining these jobs right at the current time, you know, as we're starting to really respond to this growing demand. I think there's a key recommendation that comes out of this report from EESI that I fully support. And we need a more systematic data collection classification. And, would really think that groups like ASAP, EESI are really some perfect ones to be working with the Bureau of Labor Statistics to really start generating some of these classifications as well, too. This comes from ASAP, and first of all, look at all the different logos that are sitting through here. These are the organizational members of ASAP. And a large number of these firms are in the private sector. And this has not always been the case. That if you would go back a few years ago, that the main players would have been just academia, government, nonprofit. But certainly over the past several years, the private sector has become a strong quartile sitting through here and is probably growing, at an even faster rate than the other ones. I also like ASAP's quote here that really starts looking at, defining these types of jobs. And it's not a single sort of job, right? Whether you're making adaptation plans or looking at supply chains, the agricultural side, infrastructure, looking at how people and disadvantaged communities are being impacted. All of that is this necessary work that needs to be happening. This is from, again, the Bureau of Labor Statistics that does then try to break out, where some of the jobs are that kind of link into this and where the current jobs are and then some of the expected growth. Obviously, if you start looking at the idea of environmental scientists, these are climate scientists, specialists, including people in the health sector, but also probably a lot of our Collider members recognize themselves as in this regard. Environmental engineers, when we start thinking about architecture and engineering companies and going down the list. But look at the difference of then where some more of the expected growth is really going to be looking. And you can see large growth curves projected for the solar and wind businesses, as we're really starting to look at alternative energy and what it's going to take to meet this challenge. And certainly here in Asheville and Buncombe County, we can see some very large support for the direction this is. And some of the local job growth is definitely going to be around these categories as well, too. This is from a report that was put out a couple of years ago out of the Climate Change Business Journal. And you can again see, though, that, even though a lot of the jobs have been in the mitigation, which is the orange side, that there's huge growth on the other part of this part of the climate sector is the adaptation. And, if you start thinking about, people that work on the adaptation side instead of the mitigation, that you really start seeing a lot of these categories starting to come forward. Climate risk assessment, the engineering, disaster risk reduction, people that create local tools and products and services. And, who's that demand coming from? Well, it's not just the federal government, it's the local government, but also a lot of these other groups of port authorities, water utilities, insurance companies. ASAP has been running an academy for the past several weeks for the private sector. And we're just seeing more and more people talking about a growing set of customers that are demanding these sort of services and how they're starting to align themselves to be meeting their demand as well, too. Well, let's ask a little bit about who these workers are going to be as well. What do these people look like? That, again, coming from ASAP, are these full-time jobs? Are they part-time jobs? Is it something I can base a career around? ASAP, ran a survey of our members, and you can see that several of us, myself included, have been working in this field for more than 15 years. And another large segment, have been working in the 6 to 10 years. But if you look at that, also some of these jobs are full-time, but a lot of the others are not. And you can see that, a lot of people have started working in this climate services arena as part of their other jobs. We can see like city sustainability directors who are now city sustainability and resilience directors. We can see this being added to job descriptions in the engineering companies. And this is then what we're going to be continuing to see is how we as a society and as a field grow into meeting this demand. Also, there's some very interesting things happening, as far as national trends. This is not just for the climate sector, but all the way across that, you've probably been following the news as I have, that with the pandemic, there has been perhaps a greater opportunity for us all to be a little bit more introspective and to start saying, am I working in a job that gives me joy? Am I working in a job that is making a difference? And, can also, meet my personal values. That I think, that this is a very interesting phenomenon. But, here's what people are saying. They really want to make a difference in their job. And climate services is one of those areas. If we can prove to people that this is a chance for a career and for a good paying job, then, we're going to see a lot more people going to be interested to be moving into this. 4.3 million Americans quit their jobs 2 months ago in August. I haven't seen the statistics for September, but, it might be similar. But I really like this quote too. It's not a labor shortage. It's what people are saying of why they're leaving their jobs. They need to find ways to get a better balance of their personal life and their work life. Well, let's talk a little bit about demographics. Millennials, make up a third of the workforce. And, when you start looking at the group that has the highest rate of job turnover, I find this statistic pretty staggering. 50% are expected to change their jobs this year. That is a large number of people. The second part of the demographic is one that I certainly embody sitting through here. Many baby boomers and Generation Xers are really choosing to transition to new jobs, once they have a pension or have an ability to have some income coming in as well too. We are seeing a large number of people that are deciding to move from government and academic into the private and nonprofit side. A lot of our local Collider members fit this profile as well too. And we just don't have exact statistics on this yet, but this is another reason that we need to really be gathering some hard data and looking at the trends. And, also what's going on as far as some of the rest of the demographics. Are we really encouraging a full and equal representation of our workforce that matches the, really look and feel of our country as well too? How many women, how many minorities are in this workforce as well too? So let's then talk about how does all this really apply to Asheville and the Collider, and to really try to put some, local faces on some of this that we're talking about. Those of you that were part of the creation of this wonderful, confusing bowl of spaghetti, which Mary and I have often called a rose diagram or whatever. But it was an attempt a couple of years ago by our members of the Collider to start saying, well, who are we and what sort of sectors do we fit into? So you can see a lot of boxes with logos, and then how much overlap is there between these different sectors and how do people self-represent themselves? All I can say is it's a pretty complex system, and also notice that most of our members did not put themselves into just one category. And this is an important part, right? Is most people that are working in this space do not just perform one job function. They try to respond to what the market is doing and position themselves for success. But the question I really want to ask is, does it make sense to really kind of group by sector? Or should we be more asking the question at what are the types of services and solutions we are all providing into that marketplace? And especially, what type of customers are paying us for those services and solutions? And then it might be easier for us to be identifying as, oh, we're actually serving very similar needs and customers. So with that idea in mind, really want to talk about what are some beginning idea of what some of these services are like. It's a beginning classification. You can see a lot of this is based on some of the classifications that ASAP has put out, EESI, some of the ones that have come out in some other reports. But this is a national conversation we're having, and we're trying to better define what this looks like. And I just want to kind of work through several of these. I'm not going to hit all of them in today's talk, but really want to say, okay, if we were looking in Asheville, who are those players that fit into these categories? Well, this first one is data and monitoring, right? This is the largest part of the workers here in Asheville. It's also the one that has been around the longest, right? This is the climate scientists, the people that really gather the data and monitor the changes, do the modeling, the group of scientists that won the Nobel Prize here locally. It's also then people that work on hazard data as well too, not just the climate data, and looking at some of the monitoring the risk. Collider member examples, and you'll see this always showing up on each of these slides, highlighted in blue, is obviously NOAA's NCI located downtown. We've got NOAA's Climate Program Office as a local member. The U.S. Air Force 14th Squadron, the Combat Climatology Center, is also located in the Federal Center. And then Riverside, who provides a lot of the manpower and workforce in support of these groups as well, too. I think the technology and tool providers is the second largest group. These are people that really develop a lot of the web technologies, the tools that people see to be able to access this climate information. If you talk to a lot of people outside of Asheville and you ask them, oh, well, what do you see besides, a lot of the climate scientists and the people on the federal side, who do you think of as being in Asheville? A lot of people will say, oh, yeah, they're the technology and tool creators that work with those guys. You can also see that there's a very large number of Collider members that fit into this category. And again, you can start seeing this overlap, right? It's, you'll see the top three sitting through here are not only in the, the data and monitoring category, but they create their own technologies and tools as well, too. But then we've got groups like NEMAC that Mary's a member of, and FernLeaf Interactive. Going down the list, Climate Interactive and the mitigation side, Daily Breath, for the health side, Case Consultants working across several of those different areas. I'm not going to be able to read everybody's name off of each of these, but I do want you to be, looking at the large number of people and then the different hats that they're wearing as well, too. One thing I am going to say is I'm going to beg forgiveness as well, too. And I am going to say that any Collider member that's watching and feel like that they've been unfairly represented or put in the wrong bucket, please let us know. This is a work in progress. But I think, most people, have already said, oh, no, this is what I do. And it's how they display themselves on the Collider website as well, too. I think this category is one that we have a lot of conversations about. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a large number of people about this exact area. I would certainly put myself into this category, but what the title is on this category is one that is really under debate. I like the term science translators. It's people that can help an end customer really understand the complexity of a system, to say what climate information is there. We're seeing titles like practitioner put onto this, service providers, people that develop climate plans and programs, subject matter experts. We're getting a lot of expertise in areas like the diversity, equity, and inclusion, finance, metrics of success. We also are seeing network specialists. These are people connectors and people we call influencers. If we start looking at, members in the Collider, certainly Earth's Next Chapter, Ann Waple would be in this category for that reason as well, too. It's our third largest group of professionals here locally. And again, this is, I think one of those groups that you're seeing a lot of jobs being advertised in this category at the current time as well, too. Community champions. Now, again, we're having a national debate about exactly what a definition of a community is, but certainly, a community is, local government, City of Asheville, Buncombe County, Land of Sky, Council of Governments here locally. All three of those are playing this role of a community champion, of getting our citizens and governments involved in this climate services sector, and making some of those, providing the information to a whole set of decision makers to allow change to be occurring. We're also seeing advocates in this space, right? People that head nonprofits that look at, things like a fair application of this. Certainly, we've worked with the state of North Carolina. I would put the staff and agencies that are in our state as some champions for encouraging change across our state. But also, if you start thinking about communities are not just governments. They are neighborhoods or underrepresented parts of our population as well too. But they're also natural systems, and so natural system managers and land managers also fit in this category. Two of the examples I think from the Collider are the WNC Health Network, who really represents healthcare and how that is being impacted by a changing climate, and the Green Belt Alliance as well too. Architecture and engineering firms, most of us recognize this group, certainly, mostly known for large engineering firms responsible for really putting in a lot of nation's infrastructure. If you're looking at building a bridge, or, somebody that's like updating I-26 going through, Asheville, that's being headed by, large engineering firms. This is one of the sectors that's seeing a large growth at ASAP. But it can be both large and small firms. And, as we start really talk about, taking action at a local level, we're going to need these design and construction expertise really to be putting this into action. Unfortunately, Asheville has not really been very successful in attracting the larger firms in this category. We've got a few, that show up occasionally in Asheville. None of them are members of the Collider right now, but we do have some good member examples. Acclimatized, Blue Earth, and Woods Dindy architects within the Collider. As far as construction and manufacturing, I put a lot of these into the mitigation side. These are both large and small firms, but it's certainly one of those sectors that we saw early in the talk about really anticipating a large amount of growth. And we're seeing that growth nationally and locally. And, this is on the solar and wind, the electrical storage and batteries. We've got several Collider members, that fit into this category. And we're probably going to be seeing, the largest area of some local growth and future jobs, right, sitting through here. Education. Education is something we all think about a little bit differently. But we do know through our local members that, this can be grouped into kind of three main categories of formal, kind of, how do you learn in a classroom and, K through 12 or, college. Informal, how do you learn in museums or national parks? And then this concept of non-formal education, which is inclusive of those things I didn't just mention, but, how people want to be learning more about, well, tell me more about how the climate is changing. Or, gee, I really want to go to a science pub tonight to be learning about these different things. We do note that most of these types of educators really do not rely on climate services as their main income generator. But again, we've got at least 6 members of the Collider that fit into this category as well, too. I do want to mention funders and investors, as we're looking at this business opportunity and people that need to know about what's happening in the climate sector to be able to be investing for the future and providing that capital to allow the growth to occur, that these people really believe in the value of what we're talking about, the climate services. These people support both the networks and individual members. But I doubt if any of these people would consider this to be a full-time job or career, but they are a necessary part of this job ecosystem. And I just wanted to list these three people as some Collider member examples that, actively invest in this space and support both network and members. Now, I don't have a slide on, the last part of policymakers and elected officials, but certainly they become a very key part of the jobs that are sitting through here. But obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but at the current time, we don't have any of those sort of people as active members of the Collider, and probably for good reason. These type of people often have conflict of interest and those sort of pieces if they fit into this. Well, I'd really like to finish the talk with talking about, is the climate field the right place to base a career? And should I make a personal investment? So I just really wanted to put a few questions up here. Is this climate field really a right place to base a career? And you can certainly talk to several members of the Collider, who have been fighting this battle for quite a few years and talking about, the winds blowing for and against and how difficult it is to, position themselves. We can also talk about, these ideas of, well, what are the more stable jobs? Where do entrepreneurs fit in? Is this market really going to materialize? And the question about who's ultimately paying becomes really important for people to be saying, who's actually going to be paying for this and what's that opportunity for a good paying job? And then, this question, especially, when it starts looking at for the educators in our society, people have to make a personal investment, not only money to pay for the education, but also their own personal time. And these questions about how much education I need, what's the difference between education and training, and really who's providing that both locally and nationally. So these are some issues, that we need to discuss and address. But with that, I've probably talked enough. And Mary, you've probably been monitoring chat. You've got a whole series of questions that we can be starting with. So just kind of like to open it up for that. And let's just see where the conversation goes. You're muted, Mary.
I am no longer muted. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Insightful and thought-provoking as always. I've really enjoyed how you lay this out and lead it to this point of how are you, if you want to do it, how best to do it. We do have a few questions. I'd like to start though with an observation and a ask on the plastic diagram, Jim. That was really something that there's a lot packed into that graphic. And if you wanted to go back to it, it's the first one with the red line and the green line. And I'm just curious, with the rate that things move, right, especially regarding climate, if you had a crystal ball, what could you say about the green line? I mean, is it moving? Is it static? What do you see?
Oh, I definitely think it's moving. Obviously, our own company of FernLeaf, which was a private sector company we launched off of the research arm of NEMAC, we've certainly been seeing growth. And, we've grown from a one-person company of Jeff Hicks, the CEO, to we've got 12 people now. But, certainly looking at a very large growth coming up. We're certainly seeing that with the people we partner with as well, too. I mentioned, ASAP seeing a very large growth in the architecture and engineering companies. Mm-hmm. We're seeing this set of company really investing a very large way for building their own resilience and adaptation fields. So we have a whole set of people that are investing. And let's not even mention the entrepreneurs, the people that are out there that are members of the Collider, people that I think Eric's on the call, but like Eric Kloss with his company of Daily Breath fit into this category as well too. So I think you're seeing it across both, large and small, that these are companies that are seeing the need as well as the opportunity, and they're willing to deal with those daily risks to be jumping into this market.
And that leads into the next part of this question then is, have you seen a shift in where the money is coming from to support the research and the development of what we need to do to deal with a changing climate?
I think we're beginning to see a shift, but I think still by and large, a large number of the dollars, here in our country ultimately start with the federal government. And then they, kind of get distributed through different programs and through the states to get to local. Certainly, we've seen local governments investing their own dollars in this in a very large way as well, too, especially as the federal government pulled back, over the past 4 years. State and local government certainly stepped forward and saying, wow, this is a big problem for us. We're going to put our own limited resources, into this as well, too. I think, the bigger part is going to be is when does the private sector and the private investor get involved in an even more way. We're seeing a lot of that movement, certainly on the mitigation side. There's a lot of things you see coming out in the news these days, New York Times and others, about the huge amount of dollars being invested in the alternative energy side right now. I'd like to see a lot more of those dollars coming into the adaptation part as well, too.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question about that kind of is also, these are kind of all falling into line very nicely. What are some of the jobs/roles that private landowners can take on? Again, it's always the question about what can I do? What can I do about all this?
Yeah. Well, I'm a private landowner here in Buncombe County, so this is a very interesting topic, right? Because I'm interested in investing in solar, right? And putting it on my land. I have a piece of land that faces north with some woodland to the south, and so I'm not perfectly suited. But I am interested then in talking with my neighbors about how I could maybe put in a local solar farm. But again, talking to the local energy provider, they say, great, just tie into the grid. And we're going, well, wait a minute, can't we kind of have something that's standalone, our own batteries, so that we could charge electric cars ourselves and get the advantage of ourselves before we have overflow that would go into the grid? These are the sorts of questions that have not been resolved yet, right? You either do standalone or you tie into the grid. You can't do kind of a combination, at least not that I know of right now. I think the other thing, landowners look to do is protect yourself against loss. Realize, where are you located in relation to floodplains or landslide hazard areas? What can you do to be lowering your risk of a wildfire impacting your house as far as cleaning out brush and things? So there's a large number of things that landowners can do. Certainly, I'm going to be going and working with one of our local neighborhoods here next month and giving them a talk about, here's some things to consider, and how do you mobilize yourself? Because a lot of times it's just not a person. It really takes people working together at a neighborhood scale, if not larger.
Very helpful. I'm going to try to do justice to this. Eric Kloss, a Collider member, who Jim is on the call. Eric Kloss runs Daily Breath, and he is also a Weather Ready Nation ambassador. And his question revolves around the idea of climate services and community resilience, and how often when an area is hit with a climate event, flooding, or ice or a drought, that it doesn't just affect one part of people's lives, it affects multiple parts of people's lives. So he's asking a question like, if a member, I think you mean a Collider member, Eric, or if someone has a client in Lumberton, for example, after a flood, fully realize that client will also be affected by other things such as air quality. And so he's asking, how is there some kind of a network or way that all these are connected so that when one issue is addressed, then the resources for addressing the other issues are also put in play?
Yeah, it's this concept of cascading impacts, and Eric puts it very well that, when a hazard occurs of flooding, the pain does not stop when the water goes down, right? It only really starts for an extended period. We had an excellent case study presented last week at a workshop that ASAP was running by Janice Barnes, who was talking about, as we were working with Charleston, South Carolina, helping them with flood issues, but then unintended consequences around the medical district. If they were just completely focused on flooding, they weren't as much focused on some of the high heat impacts of an urban heat island area that they should have been. And so Janice uses the concept of and. It's not just one thing or the other, it's and together. And so Eric, I think, put it very well that way too. It's how do we as professionals and, people that can help integrate, talk about this complexity of the system. But then I think you need those science translators to be able to explain that exact issue to members of the community and people that are assigning resources, that you need to take a balanced view as well as a balanced assigning of resources. And I think, the other part of that equation is also really looking at these underserved populations, that a lot of times what Eric is talking about is, mold growing in some people's houses that don't have the resources to be able to mitigate that mold. And so they're going to be suffering longer term health impacts just due to that lack of local resources.
Okay, thank you. Let me go back to chat. I was dealing with a little issue there. Okay, there was another interesting one, which is concerning with bringing up our workforce, our young workforce. A viewer did ask if there was a way for a junior high student to talk to someone about this career track, because they are at this point very interested. This student is not watching, he's in school, but his mother is watching for him. What would you say to that, Jim?
Well, yeah, I think there's multiple different opportunities sitting through here. So first of all, for the students, it becomes very important for us to be investing in our future. The unfortunate fact is this problem is not going away. It's not going to get better anytime soon. This is going to be the world that our children and grandchildren are going to be living in. So we need to be investing in these future generations to be the ones providing those solutions across that time continuum. We have to be. So this has to be really a prime target for really starting this discussion. I think that then from an education standpoint, you have to start with kind of answering the question of, did you know? How do we start providing this climate education on top of the rest of the things that, our students are being exposed to in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom? How do we take other partners? Certainly here in Asheville, we've partnered with the informal educators, people like the Science Museum or the Arboretum or nonprofits like Riverlink, to really help be providing some of this additional informal education that, the teachers, in the regular school just don't have either, the materials or the time to be including in the rest of their curriculum as well too. So it's a complex challenge, but it's one that we need to be facing. It's one that we need to be investing in. And there's not a single solution. Certainly here in Buncombe County, we have investments in, different parts of schools and different types of schools that parents can enroll their children in as well too.
Thanks, Jim. I do need to clarify, this student is not in junior high. I read too quickly. He is a junior in high school, is applying for colleges next year. So now it's even more important that this young person have access to someone to talk to.
Yeah, and we have a lot of our members are very happy to have that discussion. Certainly, we continue to have a very lively intern program. I think the most active intern program we have is through UNC Asheville. I know that our firm was at the career fair here this week, along with a NEMAC partner, interviewing interns to be working with our firm. And so, the opportunities, are large, but, we probably don't have the capacity to do as much as we would like to. Mm-hmm. It is the reality of the uncertainty of what this looks like, is there's not a lot of dollars that are guaranteed to be coming into this. And so it's very hard for members to give more than just a little bit of their time to really be supporting some of this as well too. So it's really this concept of how do we rapidly grow. And I think it fits into the same curve we still have, on the screen here, is how do we start building that capacity for the future at the rate that we need to now. And that means, we have to be investing in this now to get, the longer term payback.
Super. Jim, tons of good comments. This long on the whole thing, on the presentation, your comments and whatnot. Now, this question just popped in and it's long. So I'm just going to read it. Okay. It revolves around the DoD Climate Adaptation Plan. And I think you're familiar with that.
Yep.
All right. Describes an exciting movement that converges on several of your climate services classification themes. I'm exploring the relationship between climate adaptation initiatives within the borders of military installations and those in the neighboring communities. Think Charleston Air Force Base and Charleston City. Can you comment on the opportunities you anticipate for collaboration in that space? For example, installation planners and community planners merging adaptation efforts along similar risk concerns.
Yeah, well, I really like the way the question is framed because, again, this is the importance of collaboration. I grew up as an Army brat. I'm very familiar with the synergies between life on a base and the surrounding community as well, too. But it's necessary for, community partners to be working with the Department of Defense because it's not just the assets on the base, but it's the soldiers, the service members that are fulfilling our nation's mission, of serving us all, but it's also their families and the ones that are there with them as well too. So we have to take that whole community approach of saying it's not just what's happening on the base, but also around the base. It includes supply chains as well too. The fortunate news is that many of the military bases are already partnering with their neighboring cities. We're already seeing these sorts of RFPs, requests for proposals, coming out, and we would be glad to have a very detailed conversation. Certainly our firm is right in the middle of some of these, and so would be happy to follow up on that question as well too, to have some deep discussions, and I'm sure some other members at the Collider would be happy to do that as well too.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. That is about the end of the questions. There was some comment on a microgrid project that is out there that Keith Thompson has put links to in the chat if you're interested in exploring that. That's to our audience. And I think that's going to do it. Jim, for the questions.
Well, that's great. And, I'd just like to personally say, thank you for the interest. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining the conversation. And, if you're interested in learning more about the Collider and, the mission and vision and values we have, and about how you can become more involved, become either a member or supporter, we would also love to have that conversation with you as well, too. And so it's going to take all of us to meet this challenge. And it's something that I'm passionate about. I hope you've heard my passion ring true in this presentation as well, too. But we certainly need to mobilize. But we also need to provide some assurance to people that this is actually a good place to be studying and positioning yourself for a career as well, too. So that's the journey we're on, and that's why we're here to support one another. But Mary, thank you very much for moderating the discussion. And I see that the other Mary is now coming on, Mary Olson, our new network manager. And so thank you both for having me.
I want to be sure we do our final announcements.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's on there too. Thanks for everyone. Jim, you did a great job of closing us out. I can jump right to my last paragraph. Please join us for our next Climate City Insider live stream. It will be Tuesday, January 11th at 2:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please join us as Dr. Ann Waple, climate scientist, mentor, and consultant, invites us all to consider Earth's next chapter, which is also the name of her business and community, as she asks the question, what if we really could write Earth's next chapter right alongside our own? What would we want to see? Come and learn about sustaining ourselves as we build blockbuster careers in sustainability and climate. Her URL is earthnextchapter.com. I'll put it in chat. And also keep abreast of Collider events on our website, thecollider.org, and see a full list of everything that we have going on. Again, thanks for coming, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.